take a look at the integumentary system as it pertains to medical terminology. Our objectives for this unit include the basic parts of the integumentary system. We're going to break down some words related to the layers of the skin. We're going to take a look at some diseases, and particularly ones that have good medical term breakdowns so that you can use your word list and to really sort of understand and comprehensively break down these words as you're going to see them in real life. We're going to look at some cancers. We're going to look at some other skin disorders. We're also going to take a look at some of the abbreviations associated with the skin. All right, first up, we're going to take a look at the different parts of the integumentary system, the layers of the skin, and then we'll take a look at some of the terms. There are 3 layers to the skin, and so we're going to take a look at the different layers. And you can see on the right-hand side of this picture here that there are 3 brackets, really sort of representing the different depths of different layers of that skin. And so let's first name what those are. First up is the epidermis. Epidermis. And don't worry, we're going to break down what these terms mean in a moment. But you can see that the epidermis is towards the top, and you can see these little hairs poking out of the skin. And so the epidermis is the portion that faces to the outside world. It does have no blood vessels. So if you were to just gently rub across the epidermis or that outer portion of the skin, you would see no bleeding, right? There's no blood vessels in that little outer portion. It is a barrier to infection. So we do want to make sure that we keep bacteria, virus, fungus, and other things that don't belong inside the body on the outside of the body. So the epidermis is really that first layer of defense in keeping things outside of our body systems. It does contain a protein we call keratin, particularly around things like the nails, and it's what makes the nails hard and the hair a little bit thicker than the rest of the skin. If you think about the soles of your feet versus, say, the skin on your forearm, the soles of your feet contain more keratin, and it's what makes it a little bit rougher in appearance. Next up is the dermis. So that is that middle layer. Okay, it's going to be sandwiched between the two. The dermal layer, or the dermis, does have blood vessels. There's going to be some glands in here that we're going to take a look at. So we'll have some oil, some sweat, and other things. There are some nerves inside of this layer. And this is the layer where your fingerprints originate, so just an interesting fact. Let's take a look at some of the things inside of this dermal layer or inside of the dermis. So here on the right-hand side, you can see that this is a sweat gland. A sweat gland helps to produce sweat, which keeps you cool when it gets warm. And so it helps to regulate your temperature. You will notice that when you're looking at a sweat gland in a diagram, they are always separate from the hair. So if you're not quite sure what to answer, say on a test, look to see if it's a separate structure or if it's associated with a hair. If it is a separate structure, it is a sweat gland. Next to each hair, you are going to see something we call a sebaceous gland or an oil gland. So these are always associated with a piece of hair. So remember when I said if you're looking at a test, you're not sure? A sweat gland is separate and exits the skin by itself. A sebaceous gland or an oil gland is always found right next to a piece of hair. So here we've pointed out the hair. It does start deep in that second layer. So the bottom portion starts nice and deep, and then you can see it poke through the surface of the skin. The very bottom of that hair and that little sac that holds it is often referred to as the follicle. So you can actually pluck out a hair, but that follicle remains. That little cavity that held the hair is still there. So when we're talking about a hair follicle, it's that little portion of that little cavity that holds the hair. The hair is the actual portion that's going to poke out of the skin. Attached to each hair is a little muscle we call the erector pili muscle. So the erector pili muscle helps to create a more taut skin when needed. It is also really interesting because when you get really cold, this muscle tends to shorten or contract. And so what will happen is that hair will move when that muscle starts to shorten, and it causes that little goosebumps or that hair sticking straight up when you're cold or scared. Also inside the dermis are a lot of nerves. So one is being pictured here. It's this light yellowish color. It does kind of go up to the surface of where the epidermis starts, although we really keep them inside the dermis. So when you start to feel sensations, whether it's hot, cold, somebody touching you on the surface of your skin, it is all these nerves that are underneath the skin, and there's far more than the one that's pictured here, that really help you to detect all of those different senses. Third layer of the skin actually has two names on this little tab. So there's one of two ways that you can refer to that lowest level of the skin. And that is either by the term hypodermis or by the term subcutaneous. So hypodermis or subcutaneous. We're going to break this down in a future set of slides here. And so just keep those two terms in mind as we break them down, and do they mean the same thing or are they something different? And why can we use two terms for this layer? We do find very large blood vessels inside of this hypodermis or this subcutaneous layer. So if you do get a cut that goes just into the dermis, there are some smaller blood vessels. You will see some bleeding. If you make it to that subcutaneous layer, you're going to see much more bleeding because the blood vessels are much larger at that point. You also see a lot of fat. It's going to help insulate us, help to regulate our temperature, and just really separate between the muscle bone and the actual skin itself. And then we have something we call connective tissue, and connective tissue is just that. It connects the skin portion to the muscles and the bone that lie underneath the skin and all of those other organs. So you are going to see an artery and a vein, and these are relatively large in that subcutaneous layer, so they are very deep. You also see a very healthy layer of fat that's kind of in a solid layer through that subcutaneous section. And again, that's really just to help us to regulate our temperature. We wouldn't want all of our heat internally just able to escape into the outside world, so that layer of fat helps to keep it inside of our body.